Okay. Everybody can see that? Oh, and also I need to mute you all just for now. Okay. All right. So I decided to do today's lesson to be about, it's based on a, actually I think it might come out of one of my books, but it was a blog post I wrote for Jane Friedman. I don't know if you know her. She's like an industry professional who is a wonderful person to follow. Her blog. She writes all about the business of publishing and writing, and just full of great information. And she's very kind to offer other writers to come on and guest blog. So I had written this post for her, so I kind of adapted it for today about things that we can cut from our writing that kill the tension, that slow down the pace. And again, you know, I'm always conscious, half of you or all of you or whatever number of you, some of you are in, you know, advanced stages of writing. Some of you might feel like you're more in a beginning stage. So if you already know this stuff, you're awesome. You can teach it next time, but hopefully it's not too redundant. So one of the things I like to convey is that reality, like the real reality that we live, is often full of, you know, what I say is uneventful, unremarkable, lackluster moments that, you know, that are true to life. And while, you know, we often in our writing, we sometimes want to create that feeling of it being true to life. So we'll put them in because we're like, well, we want you to see that she's a real person who brushes her teeth and makes scrambled eggs and does these things. So there's nothing wrong with that, you know, urge to put them in, but from a tension standpoint, they tend to slow the pace of your writing. And so I like to think about fiction in particular as a stylized, heightened state of reality. So it's like everything is a little bit more than real reality. And that means that we're kind of always thinking about what really needs to go in, whether it needs to stay there, and what can come out. So we'll look at some things that we can take out today. So the thing I see a lot in manuscripts that I edit is what I call vagueness, and it's, or like lack of specificity, where we, again, this is often a first draft or even second draft phenomenon where we're just telling ourselves the story. So we're going to go back in later and fill the stuff in, and maybe sometimes we forget to do it. So it can be a variety of things, from, you know, describing your characters in a way that I think of as vague. Like I just really have a pet peeve against average height and medium build, because first of all, that assumes that it kind of erases people who don't live in average bodies, first of all. And second of all, you know, if your mainstream or your default is not average, what does that mean to you? So to me, that tells the reader nothing, honestly. It's like, you know, it's like saying gray. So I like us to be clear when we are describing our characters, to think about what they are really like, what they look like, how they embody themselves, and to try and do our best to approach that, or to describe that. Similarly, your character might have a role or a profession, and you just kind of throw it out there, assume like as a shorthand, thinking the reader's going to know. Well, he's a cop, she's a housewife, they're a teacher, and you don't give the details that really help us understand what that role means to your character. So you don't let us see them in action, or, you know, there's all kinds of cops, housewives, and teachers, right? So again, this, I'm being really general myself at the moment, but thinking, the goal is to get us to think about, you know, have I been specific about my character? Have I really showed the character to the reader and demonstrated them in action and dialogue, etc. Similarly, details in your character's life. Does your character drive a car, or do they drive a 20-year-old minivan coated with the grime of 3 children, right? Very big difference. What kind of car? Do they drive a sports car? Do they drive a, you know, a beloved car their deceased father helped them build from scratch? You know, all these things. Again, I'm not expecting you to do this with every single detail of your character's life, but the relevant ones, you want to think about this. Similarly, I'm just throwing out some examples. Does your character have a garden, or do they have a riot of wild roses that have been left to grow unchecked, or a tidy row of tulips and freesias, etc., right? So specificity is a lot about getting to know your characters and the setting in which they live. So it's like the more you know about them, the more you are able to create and offer those details to the reader without even having to think about it. Some of it requires like character sketching. So doing like those where you answer questions about your character, like what do they love? What do they hate? What are their fears? What are their childhood nightmares? What's their favorite color? What do they love to eat? Like getting to know them the way you would if you made a new friend. Like, you know, I think about anytime you make a new friend, you start to kind of get these details about that person's life, right? You know, who are you? Because I want to be close to you. So the more specific you are in revealing anything really to your reader, the more investment you give them into the characters, and the more they're able to see, right, quote unquote, see the setting, the story, the world in which your character inhabits. And that's especially useful to those of you who might be writing fantasy or even, you know, historical fiction, Sochi, right? You know, trying to pull on those details. And one thing I will always say is, if you're in first draft mode, don't worry so much about these things, worry about it later. First draft mode is about telling yourself the story, getting that story written. And for some of us, focusing too much on details can prevent us from finishing, just getting it down. I'm someone like that. I put lots of asterisks in my story with like, research this, find out more here, because I know that if I try to do it now, I'll just go down the rabbit hole. Okay, so we're gonna do a little exercise. And what I want you to do is, for each of these descriptors, I want you to take a character in your work, and I want you to describe that thing as it pertains to them. You don't have to write it in the sentence structure. I was just throwing it out there. So like, you know, what kind of house does, and maybe they don't even live in a house. Maybe they live in a RV that they travel around the country in. Maybe they don't even have a home. Maybe they couch surf. You know, again, if none of these apply, maybe pick something that does apply, but just see if there's at least one or two of these that you can personalize for your character. I'll give you a few minutes to write. Take another minute and then we'll wrap it up. Okay, start to finish up your thought, your sentence. So David and Yannicka, were you able to figure out what we're doing? Because you might have come in afterwards. Yeah. David?
Yeah, I think I have it.
Okay, good. All right. So how's everyone doing here? Has everybody gotten something written?
Mm-hmm.
Looking around, seeing some pensive faces.
Yes.
Okay, good. How about everybody read one of their specifics, and don't tell us which one what it is. Just read it, and we'll figure it out. And then we'll move on. So I will. You want to offer yourselves, or you want me to call on you?
Cool.
All right. How about Susan? You're at the top of my screen.
Okay. Okay, my character lives in a room in an old residential hotel he owns in Northern California. And the window looks out on the fire escape, and there are cigarette burn holes in the carpet, but he doesn't smoke.
Huh. I love that. Someone else's cigarette burns. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, Nancy.
Let's see. She moves into a new apartment. So the apartment faced west on the third floor, overlooking the building's postage stamp backyard garden. She lived a long, narrow room with a pull-down Murphy bed, double bed that emerged from the wall at night and disappeared each morning. She want me to go on?
Oh, that's good.
No, okay.
All right, Rita.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. What I have been working on is a story of the Black Plague, and the girl is, her name is Maud. She lives in a thatched hut, and the front is a herbalist room where her parents sell herbalist stuff, and in the back is where they live, and they have they don't have any pets, of course, but she takes care of some chickens, and they have either a cow or a horse. I have to do more research on that, and they just have a little hand cart. they're pretty poor. They're not they're on the land that the assignees can let them rent, and they produce they do some herbal potions and things like that. So
Cool.
I know about her so far.
I like that you guys have all picked a house. Sochi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so a new computer I'm learning. My character, her home is she lives with her family in a chateau, and her room is in one section of the wing, but she chooses to live with her best friend in the adjacent small village, sharing a bedroom in their the farmhouse of her best friend.
Awesome. All right. Andrea had to step away for a moment. David?
So do you want me to just read this?
Yeah, that's fine too.
Okay. The cafe has a piano without a bench. Patrons are encouraged to play if they can play, and if they have the stamina to stand. I think it's that way to discourage practicing or clandestine lessons or two from a music teacher that may have lost her piano. But the record player is there for everyone to use. I found this album of Spanish folk songs, so this is my way of getting it into the novel. I've heard my album played the most. I'm fond of the lyrics, almost the universal appeal sample of lyrics. There are sing-alongs, some good, some bad, the worst made tone deaf by too much wine. Everyone enjoying their time. Now that the terrible troubles are here, song has been replaced by writing as the open fists and clashed fists clash in the main square. I tell you, sons yell with force at fathers.
Nice. Good work. Yannicka.
This is in World War II, where the Jakob is now in the same barrack with his father after their reunification. When Poppy entered into their lives again and their new home became the oddly named posh prison barrack, music re-entered Jakob's soul. He yearned to have the pretend painted keyboard that he and his friend Siba had shared at the first camp, the women and children's camp of Chideng. He spent days with an eye out for a flat wooden board. Usually he had an eye out for scraps of sustenance, whether garbage, grown like pieces were hard to find because they were needed for clandestine fires. One day, climbing up to their middle-level tier of sleeping platforms, Jakob saw that on the other side of the aisle, a tired man stared up at a peeling slice of wood. Within 24 hours, it was Jakob's. And then goes on to say how he creates the pretend keyboard with charcoal and ashes from the fire while whistling and humming a tune in his head.
Oh, I love that. That's wonderful. Very specific. I love that too about when you're in a situation where you can't have the music, the experience you yearn for, that whole idea of kind of creating it out of what you have, even if it's a fantasy.
Yeah.
Lovely. Linda.
Mine's a lot shorter. Really,
Cute.
Mine is my character Ben, whom you've all met from before. Ben loves to listen to opera and rap, particularly German opera, because both have a poetic quality and an intensity that makes him feel anything, and sometimes even makes him write.
Nice. I like the kind of contrast there of opera and rap.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. Good
He
work.
also drives a Maserati.
That's great. Oh, Andrea's back. Just in time for me to call on you.
Oh, okay, out of breath, but
What'd you do? Go jog? Get some ideas?
we have a house. We have a 3-floor house, and then you hear the screaming, and you have to go.
Oh, children.
But it's all good. Nobody's bleeding. So hold on. I started with the house, but then I actually moved on to the pet. she has a black cat that likes to curl up by her feet at night and purr loudly, surprisingly loudly for such a small creature. Arlie learned how to walk quietly as her cat, stepping on her toes first, so to not disturb the downstairs neighbor who always complains about loud noises. She envies the cat and her seemingly uninterest in wishes and directives from others, doing exactly what she feels like doing in the very moment.
Nice. I love it. Sorry, you're out of breath. I didn't mean to catch you. I would have given you a minute to breathe. All right, good work. So moving on, the opposite of vagueness, of course, is excruciating detail. Most of us, I don't think most of us are guilty of this, but you know, it happens sometimes, especially when we're like on a tangent, and if we've done some research, we might go deep. This might happen if your protagonist is in a trade or a profession or does something that requires technical know-how, or it might happen if you're writing historical fiction, right? Because you want to get the details right. In our attempt to create, you know, verisimilitude, that idea that creating what feels real to the reader, we might sometimes offer way too much detail. And, you know, we don't need to see an entire heart surgery, just enough details to allow the reader to believe that we are in the operating room and that the character you've written actually knows how to perform surgery. A couple of choice words, terms, technical details will probably be enough. And this is honestly true in general, that I find that we often feel we need to explain more to the reader than we actually do. And the reader is really smart and usually able to pick up subtle cues. Bless you to whomever's sneezing.
I'm sorry. I'm going to mute.
Oh yeah, feel free to mute yourselves, but I'm also happy to bless you. So just check yourself, you look through your work for places where you might have gone on at length. What happens is when we go on too long is, again, the reader starts to feel impatient, bored, talked down to, you know, they get like, well, where's the action? Get me back to the action. So too much detail slows the pace and kills tension. If I'd had more time, I'd have like tried to create a example we could try to edit, but I didn't. So we're gonna move back. We're gonna move on to the next one, which is dialogue. The most common thing I see in terms of dialogue that needs cutting is what I call pleasantries. And this is when people talk about the weather, unimportant details. They say nice things to each other that don't really move the plot forward. There's a lot of, hi, how are you? Good. You too. How are you? Great. Wonderful. You know, just like, again, it's verisimilitude. We're trying to create real life, but we forget that the reader reading it is like, yeah, I get how people talk to each other, get to the good stuff, right? I always say the dialogue should be stylized and strategic. So when I say stylized, I mean characters talk in a specific way. So we know one character from another, it's often just by how they sound. Strategic meaning you're using that, you, the writer, are wielding the dialogue. The characters may speak it, but you're the one pulling the strings behind the scenes. And it should reveal something, whether that's about the character, so we learn something more about character, or it drives the plot a little bit forward by revealing a piece of information. And really try to think about how people talk. You know, one of the things I loved, Susan, about your piece is the dialogue, the way that they talk to each other. It's so, you know, it's like how people talk. We don't always talk in full sentences. We don't always like take time to like, you know, pull our thoughts out. Or if you're talking to someone you know really well, you might even have a shorthand, right? Where you say a few words and the other person gets it. You know, you have inside jokes, you have subtext. So think about how people talk to each other. Again, in revision, you don't have to worry about this stuff in first draft, and try to make your dialogue reflect that. And again, really try to cut those, like, where do you want to meet for dinner? Oh, at that restaurant. Okay, what time? Sure, 5 o'clock sounds great. You know, like, just cut it, please. Unless there's like a really good reason that something needs to be revealed in dialogue about where they're meeting for dinner. But generally, I find it's just throat clearing and can go. And I love this phrase, which the dialogue should be conversation's greatest hits. I love that phrase. To me, that always is just a good little reminder that it should be more than just serviceable getting it. You know, it should have meaning and import. And that comes, I took that from a book called Between the Lines by Jessica Morell, but she was quoting someone. I need to go back and actually look through the book and find out who she was quoting, because I never remember. That poor person keeps, you know, what's the word? Dwelling in obscurity. All right, so this will be the only other exercise we do, and then we'll get on to critique soon. But I know that this might be asking a lot, but let's give it a try. So what I want you to do is to put your protagonist, and maybe you already have a scene like this and you can just kind of recreate it, but in a situation where they have to say something or ask for something from another character that they're uncomfortable about. It makes them feel weird or bad, or it could even be, not impossible, but difficult. It's a difficult conversation. They don't want to have it, but they have to have it. But they can't be the first thing they say. They can't just be like, "Hi, I'm pregnant." It has to be, they have to work up to it. So see if you can write a few, lines of dialogue with your character working their way up to saying what they need to say without that being full of pleasantries. I realize I'm asking a lot. So I'll give you a few minutes. I have to use the restroom while I do so. I'll be back. I promise it won't be long. Bless you. Whoops. How about last minute, or do you guys need more time? Thirty seconds, wrap up your thought. What I'd like everyone to do, if you're willing, is to actually email me this, and I'll share it in the doc because we won't have enough time to read them all. But I would like to hear from you all if, how did you get to, what did you do to avoid pleasantries? If you can answer that in a question, I'm not sure. What did your characters talk about? Maybe just give me 30 seconds worth of discussion each. I'll start from the bottom of my screen this time. Linda, are you there? Your face is, your camera's turned off, so I don't know what that means. Oh, she's unmuting though.
I have my camera off because eating salad's kind of clumsy and I don't want you to see everything falling out of my mouth. The question was, how do I avoid pleasantries?
Mm-hmm. What did your characters talk about? Like, sort of tell me what you wrote without reading what you wrote is what I'm.
I actually wrote about someone telling Kevin that she was pregnant. So
did she cut right to the chase, or did she?
No, not at all. She quite a bit waffled, and he kind of waffled too. I kind of looked at it as a little bit of a fencing match, and
I like that.
And it took her a while to get there.
Nice.
And she kept on looking for different excuses for why she had asked to see him.
I feel a little bit bad that Kevin is procreating, but you know.
Well, yeah, whatever.
Yeah. All right, good job. Yannicka, how did you achieve it?
Well, my characters was Lucy, adult daughter in present day with her mother, who she's just kind of knee-jerk, avoided emotional intimacy with for years. And they start with substitute pleasantries like, it's nice to hear your voice, blah, blah, blah. And then it you know, comes into what kids in general think about their parents. And then Luce blurts out a long overdue apology and her wish to be closer to her mother.
Nice. I like that. I like that, substitute apologies or pleasantries. Yeah. David?
Well, I did everything except the dialogue. Because they're all the dialogue in my novel is secondhand, so there's no direct dialogue anywhere. But what I did is I set things up so that I can have one of my characters create an imaginary dialogue between herself and the two lovers. That's about longing. So nice. I think this can really lead to something good.
I like that. Nice. It works thematically. Actually, using that whole idea of imagining something is actually a great device in fictional. Actually,
I have to use that a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to use it a lot, right?
Yeah.
All right, Andrea. Great. My contractor's here. He's going to start banging. That's great.
So this was interesting because I realized that I feel uncomfortable myself asking about anything at any time. I thought it should be really easy to do, and then I was a little stuck. But then I actually figured out. So my character in this exercise was a teenage girl who's trying to ask her mother to let her go out for the movies on Friday night, and all of that back and forth that goes into it. To sort of set the scene in the best possible light to get a yes when you're expecting a no. And then the mom, of course, knows from the very beginning where that is going. And she's playing her part.
That's great. I like that. Good. Okay, well, I can't wait to read these. Sochi, what was your character grappling with?
It's something I've been working on between Alex and Fassbender. He's got her basically a prisoner. It's a dialogue between her trying to dig more into his past and his personal life. And he's really clever at bouncing it back at her. And she's just kind of going in circles with him, still not getting information out of him. Personal information, just to understand what she's dealing with.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Great. Well, I'll look forward to reading that one too. And Nancy?
Well, the scene I have is Gabrielle is and Paul are moving in together, and this is their first apartment. So she's looking at this apartment. It has to be cheap because they don't have any money. So finds this apartment, and it's in the early 70s. So young couples that are married just started living together. You know, it's just
right.
So Paul tells her not to tell the landlady that they're not married, and so she's, I can't lie. And he says you have to because you won't get the apartment. So what happens is that the first thing she does is lie. And so she finds a key in her pocket, and it must have been the key to her old apartment in her pocket. She finds a key in her pocket. She goes, oh, this must be an old key. My old apartment. She puts it in the door, and it opens the door to this new apartment. So she goes in and she starts looking around. The landlady wasn't there. So the landlady comes a few minutes later and she says, how did you get in? She says, and so Gabrielle says it was open. and so she look around. The first thing the landlady asks her is, are you two married? And so she avoids the question. She answers it she gives a different answer. So yes. They talk a little bit, look at the apartment and negotiate. She says, so by the way, are you two married?
Oh, geez.
And so she says, so Gabrielle says, yeah, we are. She lies. So
wow.
Of their relationship.
I like that.
Living together.
Nice. Good tension building there. Rita.
There we go. I tried to write a scene about this girl, Maud. Her father tries to escape the city, and she realizes he's left the house, but he didn't say goodbye. So she runs after him, and she can't bring herself to ask him if he's leaving or say goodbye. So I was tackling that.
That's tough, yeah.
He's going to try to escape the plague by going to another part of the country.
I may have to move my computer into my bedroom, which is not my ideal location, but there's a whole bunch of banging going on behind me so you get to walk with me through my house. Okay, and Susan, last.
Yeah, mine was a conversation between Jimmy and a cop, and he wants the cop to try to find some information for him, but he doesn't want to ask about it. So,
okay.
I'll email you the conversation.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Okay, I'm propping some pillows here. That's funny. All right. Okay, good work, everyone. So a couple more points and then we'll get on to Susan. And Rita has to leave a little early, so you may be one of the first critiquers, okay? Another thing great to cut is what I call stage directions, and this is where we just sort of, we give too many details that are unnecessary. It might be when we're getting our characters from point A to point B. We're saying something maybe multiple ways in the same thing different ways. This is the example I'm giving here. He rose from his chair, strode across the room, grasped the doorknob, and turned it. How about simply he left the room, or he left the room in a hurry, or he was out of that room before he had time to think? It's something about those details that gets a little excessive. And again, I think we do that when we're in our minds, we're in the scene, and we're kind of like walking through the steps. But by the time you want to prepare it for a reader, you want to cut that stuff. All right. And I'm not going to have us do this exercise today, but I'm going to, when I send the slides, feel free to try it. So I wrote a couple of examples where like there's a lot of information that's saying the same thing in each example. And you can try and, the exercise was going to be to try and pare it down or tighten it up. So here are some examples here. She got dressed in clothes she rarely wore for the funeral, putting on her only black dress and tights and her one pair of black pumps, right? Now we know what people wear to a funeral, so she got dressed in her only black funeral dress or something like that, right? In her rage, she knew she would be destructive. She cleared the table of dishes with one angry swipe of her hands. There's a lot of like telling in this statement, right? She could just, in her rage, she cleared the table of dishes with one swipe of her hands, etc. Okay, so you can look at those later. Another thing that I find we often do in first drafts is you announce to the reader what the character is about to do before they do it. It might be in their thoughts, or it might be in the narrative voice. He was going to leave this house and never look back. He stood up, turned to his mother and shouted, "I'm leaving and I'm never coming back," right? And again, this is just sort of habits we fall into without noticing. It can be something even more subtle than that, where again, you're using the narrative voice, which is the information where you, kind of the narrator, tell the story versus the character, filtering it through their own point of view. Another thing that we often do is we interrupt important actions with characters suddenly thinking in a way that is not helpful to the pace or the tension of the story. I wrote my examples are always bad. I just own that, okay? But it gives you an idea. Example: the hillside shook violently beneath him and began to crumble. Julia screamed and reached out for him. A huge crack appeared between them. If he tried to run toward Julia, the earth would swallow him. This reminded him of one of the times he went volcano hunting with his father as a child. When the ground trembled, his father had simply scooped him up and dashed toward safety. He felt so safe in his father's arms, right? So I want to know what happens with him and Julia. I don't care about his father right here at this moment. That might be a nice flashback for when they are safe and after the action has completed, right? So just to become aware of how thoughts move in and out of your action is important. And key times for limiting thought: action, sexual union, big, heated moments between characters. Try to scale back on the thinking. Yeah, I think we're almost done here, don't worry. Another thing, I haven't seen a lot of this in this class, so you're off the hook, but it happens. What I call melodrama, and yes, there is a fine line between drama and melodrama, and it can be hard to tell the difference. But what it looks like is often over-the-top emotion or hyperbole, characters who shriek or scream or yell or engage in big confrontations and make a scene in an excessive way, where the reader's kind of like, okay. Now, you may have a character for whom this is a very specific character, creation. You've created them to be like this on purpose, but understand that characters that come off like this, whether they're hysterical or kind of overreactive, eventually kind of turn the reader off. So it has to be purposeful and in fact, I'm listening to a book right now on audio called, which was very highly acclaimed, and I like it a lot. It's called Eleanor Oliphant is Perfectly Fine. Oliphant. And her mother is like this sociopathic character who's so evil and cruel that it kind of stretches credulity for me. Like I kind of am like, she's so bad, she's so awful, she's so evil, that after a while I start to find her hard to accept, So just be aware that that's a function. it also is often a sign that your character development hasn't gone as deep as you need it to go. So if you're getting that reaction from readers that it feels over the top or it feels melodramatic, it means you probably need to get to know your characters a little bit better and understand how they would legitimately react to situations. So I won't make us, again, we don't really have time to do this exercise, but I wrote another example up of how could we take the melodrama out of this scene? So, Chloe threw herself at John, clawing at his coat as if she could rip away the lies with the fabric. How could you do this to me? You were the only person I ever trusted. She flung herself back on the couch. John tried to reach for her, but she slapped his hand away. Don't come near me. I can't ever look at you. John's face crumbled. He fell to his knees before Chloe. Please, my darling, I will never go to Hooters again. I had to throw in some humor. Humor. So, like, there's so many ways to communicate outrage and upset, and without it being like falling back on couches and screaming, how could you do this to me, right? And there are scenes where that's an appropriate thing to say, but you might want to check your character's level of emotional reactivity. So, all right. And similarly, and I think this is my last slide, so just as what I call, I always say nice people make for boring fiction, right? When everyone is too nice and too happy, the reader starts to get bored. So, or worry that something bad is about to happen. So look for this in your character where there's like too much sentimentality. The mother who always tells her children they're angels, or characters who remember their parent in an idealized way. The husband who claims to cherish his wife's every breath. The school teacher who only sees the goodness in his students. Another pet peeve of mine is when characters talk with incredible self-awareness about their feelings to each other. Like I read a manuscript where it's like the characters, they had closure around something had gone on between them, and they both sat down and expressed how they knew what their part of it was. And I was like, I feel like I'm in a therapy session, right? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with self-aware characters, but there's a certain level of it that, is tensionful, and another level that is lacking in tension. And the more people talk about their feelings, generally I find the less tension you create. So it's like, keep it to a minimum, have people be concise about that.